The final boarding call of destiny. The urgency you feel inside you right now can best be understood through a simple but powerful image. The moment when an airport terminal suddenly erupts with the sound of a final boarding announcement. Imagine sitting comfortably at the gate after hours of waiting. Your bag is beside you, your phone is in your hand, and the environment has become familiar enough that you almost forget you are about to leave. Travelers sit quietly, scrolling through their screens, sipping coffee, and stretching their legs as if time has slowed down. For a long while, nothing happens. The flight seems distant, almost theoretical. You have grown used to the waiting. But then, something changes. The intercom crackles to life, and a calm but unmistakable voice fills the terminal, announcing the final boarding call. The gate will close in 2 minutes. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere shifts. The same room that felt relaxed moments ago now vibrates with urgency. People stand up quickly, grab their bags, and move with focus. No one continues casually scrolling through distractions. No one debates whether the announcement was serious. Everyone instinctively understands that the window of opportunity is closing and action must be taken immediately. That sensation in your chest, the pressure, the restlessness, the sudden sharpening of your awareness, mirrors that exact moment. Your spirit recognizes that something long anticipated is no longer distant. The flight you have been waiting for is ready to depart, and the call to board has already been announced. When you view the situation through this lens, something important becomes clear. The silence you may have felt from God recently is not abandonment. It is not distance, and it is certainly not rejection. In fact, the silence carries a very different meaning. It is the silence of a teacher who has finished explaining the lesson and is now watching as the student begins the final exam. For a long time, you were given instructions, confirmations, and gentle nudges pointing you in a certain direction. You asked for guidance and received it in many forms. You learned through experiences, through challenges, through moments of clarity that arrived at just the right time. But there comes a stage in every spiritual journey when explanation must end and action must begin. A teacher cannot sit beside the student during the exam, whispering every answer. The teacher steps back, not because they have abandoned the student, but because the moment has arrived for the student to demonstrate what they have learned. The same dynamic is unfolding in your life. The silence you feel now is not emptiness. It is trust. It is the quiet confidence of heaven, acknowledging that you have already been prepared for what comes next. For years, you may have lived inside what could be called the waiting season. This was a period where patience became your daily discipline. You waited for clarity. You waited for opportunities. You waited for confirmation that the path you sensed in your spirit was truly real. Waiting can feel frustrating while you are inside it, yet waiting seasons are rarely wasted time. They are workshops of preparation, where unseen foundations are being built beneath the surface of your life. Skills develop quietly. Character strengthens through trials. Vision becomes clearer as distractions fall away. In those seasons, it can sometimes feel like nothing is happening. Yet in reality, everything important is being assembled, piece by piece. But waiting seasons are not designed to last forever. Preparation has a purpose, and that purpose is deployment. The moment inevitably arrives when the period of gathering strength must give way to the moment of movement. That moment is where you stand now. The waiting season has reached its natural conclusion, and preparation time has officially expired. This realization can feel both exhilarating and unsettling at the same time. Part of you recognizes the truth immediately, because deep within your spirit, you have always known this moment would come. Yet another part of you may feel hesitant, wishing for just a little more time to prepare, a little more certainty, a few more guarantees that everything will work exactly as planned. But destiny rarely offers the luxury of perfect readiness. The call to step forward usually arrives before comfort catches up with courage. That is precisely why the urgency feels so intense. Your spirit knows the gate is closing. The flight is ready. The only remaining question is whether you will move toward the door. The message here is not meant to push you into panic or reckless action. Instead, it is meant to redirect your focus from endless reflection toward purposeful movement. Reflection has its place, and it served you well during the season of preparation. You analyzed your experiences, examined your motives, and refined your understanding of what you were being called to do. But reflection becomes counterproductive when it replaces action. There is a subtle difference between thoughtful preparation and quiet hesitation. One builds readiness, while the other delays progress. At this stage of your journey, the balance must shift. The energy that once went into planning and questioning must now move toward execution. Think again of the traveler standing at the airport gate. Once the final boarding call is announced, the traveler does not sit down to reconsider the entire trip. They do not start researching the weather at their destination or calculating whether the flight might experience turbulence. Those questions belonged to the planning stage. When the final call comes, the only appropriate response is movement. The traveler picks up their bag and walks toward the gate because the opportunity to board exists only for a short window of time. In the same way, your life has reached a moment where the gate of destiny is open, but not indefinitely. The waiting room is no longer where you are meant to remain. The voice calling you forward is not asking for more preparation or deeper analysis. It is calling for a step. Not 10 steps at once, not a perfectly mapped plan for the next decade, but one decisive movement that signals your readiness to leave the waiting room behind. When that step is taken, something remarkable often happens. What once looked like uncertainty begins to organize itself into direction. What once felt like risk begins to reveal hidden pathways. Doors that seemed sealed begin to open as if they were waiting for your movement to activate them. This is the nature of destiny. It rarely unfolds fully in advance. It reveals itself progressively as courage meets opportunity. The final boarding call of destiny is sounding, not to intimidate you, but to awaken the strength that has been quietly growing within you during the years of preparation. You are not being asked to step forward because you are perfectly ready. You are being asked to step forward because the moment that was prepared for you has finally arrived. Understanding divine time. Chronos versus Kairos. As you begin to understand why the urgency inside you feels so intense, it becomes necessary to explore a deeper truth about the nature of time itself. Because not all time operates according to the same rules. The message introduces two powerful concepts that have shaped spiritual understanding for centuries. Two dimensions of time that operate side by side, yet feel completely different when experienced in real life. The first is Chronos, the familiar form of time that every human being learns to navigate from childhood. Chronos is the ticking of the clock, the steady march of seconds turning into minutes, minutes into hours, and hours into days. It is the time that governs calendars, deadlines, schedules, and appointments. Chronos is the time you manage when you plan your week, when you set alarms, when you calculate how long it will take to finish a task or reach a destination. In this dimension of time, everything feels predictable and measurable. You can look at a calendar and believe you understand the future. You can delay decisions, postpone action, and rearrange your schedule because Chronos time always seems to offer another tomorrow. Most people live almost entirely inside this dimension. They measure progress through years of preparation, savings accounts, career ladders, and long-term strategies. In Chronos thinking, success is something built gradually through consistent effort over long periods. There is wisdom in this kind of thinking, because discipline and patience are valuable qualities. Yet Chronos is only one layer of time, and it is not the layer where destiny usually reveals itself. Running parallel to Chronos is another dimension of time known as Kairos, a word that describes something far more mysterious and powerful. Kairos does not refer to a quantity of time, but to a moment of divine alignment, a window when the invisible plans of heaven intersect with the visible circumstances of earth. Kairos moments feel different from ordinary time because they carry a sense of significance that cannot be explained by logic alone. In Chronos, you can wait patiently for years without much changing, but in Kairos, everything can shift in a single moment. Opportunities appear suddenly. Doors open without warning. Decisions that once seemed impossible become obvious and urgent. It is as if an unseen hand has arranged events in such a way that action taken at that exact moment carries multiplied power. These moments are not random accidents. They are appointments written into the deeper rhythm of life. Moments when preparation, timing, and purpose converge in ways that cannot be recreated later by simply trying harder. To understand this more clearly, imagine a farmer who spends months preparing the soil, planting seeds, watering the ground, and protecting the young plants from storms. All of this work happens within Chronos time, day after day of steady labor that appears slow and ordinary. But eventually, a moment arrives when the crop is ready for harvest. That moment is Kairos. If the farmer harvests the crop at the right time, the fruit is abundant and nourishing. But if the farmer waits too long, believing that there will always be another day, the harvest window closes. The fruit may rot, storms may arrive, or the opportunity may simply pass. No amount of extra effort later can recreate the exact conditions that existed during that brief window of alignment. In the same way, your life contains seasons of Chronos preparation, followed by Kairos moments of decisive movement. For a long time, you may have been living within the slow rhythm of Chronos, gathering knowledge, building resilience, and waiting for clarity. During that period, it was appropriate to take your time, to reflect, to grow, and to strengthen your foundation. But now the internal urgency you feel is signaling that something different is happening. The atmosphere has shifted from Chronos preparation into Kairos opportunity. This is why the pressure feels unfamiliar. Your mind may still be operating according to Chronos logic, telling you that you need more months, more resources, more confirmation before you move. Chronos thinking loves security because it believes that everything should unfold gradually and predictably. Yet Kairos does not operate according to those expectations. Kairos moments arrive suddenly, often before a person feels completely ready. They require faith rather than certainty, courage rather than calculation. The message, therefore, offers an important warning that must not be ignored. Kairos moments do not wait for human readiness. They do not pause while you finish one more course, save a little more money, or gather a few more opinions from people around you. When divine timing aligns with earthly opportunity, the window opens for movement, and then eventually closes again. This is not meant to create fear, but to awaken awareness. Many people miss their Kairos moments because they try to treat them like Chronos opportunities. They believe they can always come back tomorrow, always delay action until the conditions feel safer. But Kairos does not negotiate with hesitation. It asks a simple question in a very short period of time. Are you willing to move now? When the Red Sea parted for the people of Israel, that moment represented a kairos event. The water opened and the path appeared. Yet the people could not stand on the shore analyzing the situation indefinitely. The sea would not remain open forever. The miracle required a step of trust. In the same way, the urgency you feel now is not random stress, but the signal that a kairos window may be unfolding in your life. The alignment between preparation and opportunity is forming, and your spirit senses that the moment carries weight. Understanding the difference between chronos and kairos allows you to interpret that urgency correctly. It is not pressure to panic. It is the awareness that time has shifted from preparation to participation. The question is no longer how long you have been waiting, but whether you will recognize the moment when it arrives. Recognizing the signs of a kairos window. As you begin to understand the difference between ordinary time and divine timing, the next question naturally arises within your mind. How can you know for certain that a kairos moment is actually unfolding in your life, rather than simply imagining that something significant is happening? Divine timing is powerful, but it is not mysterious in the sense of being completely hidden. When a kairos window opens, it leaves unmistakable fingerprints on your circumstances and within your spirit. The message reveals that there are three clear indicators that often appear together when a kairos moment is arriving. These indicators do not shout with obvious explanations, but once you recognize them, they create a pattern that becomes impossible to ignore. The first indicator emerges through acceleration, a sudden and often surprising change in the speed of life itself. For a long time, your progress may have felt slow, almost painfully slow. Problems that needed resolution seemed to stretch across months or even years, while opportunities appeared rarely and required enormous effort to develop. During that period, everything moved according to the steady rhythm of chronos time. Gradual, predictable, and sometimes frustrating. But when a kairos window begins to open, the atmosphere shifts and the pace of events begins to accelerate. Situations that once felt stuck begin moving rapidly. Conversations happen that were delayed for months. Doors that seemed permanently closed suddenly unlock. At the same time, challenges that once remained distant may escalate quickly, demanding immediate decisions and clear direction. The speed itself becomes the signal. It feels as though life has shifted from walking to running, from drifting slowly down a river to suddenly entering a powerful current. Acceleration does not always mean that everything becomes easier. In fact, it often means the opposite. When the current strengthens, both opportunities and obstacles appear more quickly, forcing you to respond with greater clarity and courage. But the increased momentum reveals that something has changed within the spiritual atmosphere around you. The stage of quiet preparation has ended, and movement has begun. As acceleration reshapes the rhythm of your external life, a second indicator often appears within your inner world, a sensation that can best be described as agitation. This agitation is not the same as anxiety or panic. Anxiety often feels chaotic and directionless, like a storm of thoughts with no clear meaning. The agitation connected to a kairos moment carries a different quality. It feels more like the uncomfortable awareness that you have outgrown the environment you once called home. Situations that previously felt acceptable begin to feel tight, restrictive, or strangely out of alignment with who you are becoming. Your job may suddenly feel smaller than your potential. Conversations that once seemed engaging may now feel empty or repetitive. Even routines that used to provide comfort can start to feel confining. It is as if the clothes you once wore comfortably no longer fit your body. You can still wear them, but every movement reminds you that something has changed. This internal discomfort is not punishment. And it is not confusion. It is growth announcing itself. When a kairos moment approaches, the soul often begins to sense that the current season is ending. The agitation you feel is the Spirit's way of loosening your attachment to what once felt familiar, so that you will have the courage to step toward what is new. Without that inner tension, many people would remain in comfortable routines forever, even if those routines quietly prevented them from stepping into their purpose. The third indicator may be the most surprising, and sometimes the most misunderstood of all, and it arrives in the form of divine silence. For many people, the expectation is that when an important moment approaches, God will speak louder and provide even more instructions. Yet the opposite often occurs. The guidance that once came frequently may seem to pause. Prayers that once produced immediate clarity may now feel quiet. At first, this silence can feel unsettling because the human mind interprets silence as absence. But in reality, divine silence often carries a very specific meaning. It means the instruction has already been given. Imagine a teacher who has explained the lesson, demonstrated the method, and answered every question the students asked. When the exam begins, the teacher does not continue speaking because the time for instruction has already passed. The responsibility now belongs to the student to act upon what has been learned. In the same way, when a kairos window opens, heaven sometimes becomes quiet, not because direction is missing, but because the direction has already been placed inside your spirit. The silence invites you to trust what you have already heard, and to move forward with confidence, rather than waiting endlessly for additional confirmation. When these three indicators appear together, acceleration in the events around you, agitation within the environment you once felt comfortable in, and the quiet clarity of divine silence, they form a pattern that is difficult to dismiss. Each one alone might be interpreted as coincidence, but together they reveal the opening of a kairos window. Life begins moving faster. Your spirit becomes restless with the present situation, and heaven waits quietly for your response. These signs do not exist to pressure you, but to awaken you. They are reminders that the season of waiting is shifting into the season of movement, and that the moment you have been preparing for may already be unfolding right before your eyes. The hidden trap of endless preparation. As the signs of a kairos moment begin to appear, and the urgency of divine timing becomes clearer, another challenge quietly emerges that many people fail to recognize until it has already delayed them for years. This challenge is not fear in its obvious form, nor is it outright rebellion against purpose. Instead, it hides behind something that looks noble, wise, and even spiritual. It is the trap of endless preparation. Many people postpone stepping into their calling, not because they lack vision or desire, but because they convince themselves they simply need a little more time to get ready. They tell themselves they must gather more knowledge, build more resources, heal a few more emotional wounds, or wait for the perfect conditions before they begin. On the surface, this sounds responsible and even admirable. Preparation appears disciplined. It feels thoughtful and careful. In many cases, preparation is necessary because important assignments require wisdom and growth before they can be carried out effectively. But the danger appears when preparation stops serving the purpose and begins replacing it. When a kairos moment arrives, preparation that once served as a tool can quietly transform into a shield used to hide from action. This is why the message reveals that preparation, though valuable in its proper season, can become a form of disobedience when the time for movement has already arrived. It is not because preparation itself is wrong, but because every season has its own responsibility. During the season of waiting, your responsibility was to learn, to develop patience, to grow stronger in character and understanding. In that season, it would have been premature to rush forward without wisdom. But when divine timing shifts and the Kairos window opens, the responsibility changes. At that moment, the most faithful response is no longer additional preparation, but courageous movement. Yet many people struggle to recognize when that transition has occurred. They remain inside the habits of preparation long after the moment for action has arrived. They continue reading, researching, praying for more confirmation, and refining plans that were already sufficient months or even years ago. What once looked like spiritual diligence becomes a comfortable hiding place where no real risk must be taken. The mind feels productive because it is constantly learning, yet the calling remains untouched because the first step has not been taken. This dynamic is beautifully illustrated through the powerful story of Moses standing at the edge of the Red Sea. In that moment, the people of Israel faced what seemed like an impossible situation. Behind them, the army of Pharaoh was approaching, determined to bring them back into captivity. In front of them stretched the vast waters of the sea with no visible path forward. The pressure was immense, and the danger felt overwhelming. In response, Moses did what any faithful leader might naturally do. He cried out to God. He prayed for intervention, for guidance, for a miracle that would rescue them from the impossible position they were facing. Yet the response God gave Moses in that moment carried a lesson that still echoes through history. Instead of providing a new instruction or praising Moses for his prayer, God interrupted the prayer with a question that cut straight to the heart of the situation. "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to move forward." This response reveals a profound truth about divine timing. There are moments when prayer is the right response because clarity and strength are still being formed. But there are also moments when prayer becomes unnecessary because the instruction has already been given. In those moments, continuing to pray for guidance can actually delay obedience. The sea was not going to part while the people stood still discussing possibilities. The miracle was waiting for movement. The waters would respond not to endless reflection, but to the courage of the first step. The same principle often appears in the lives of those who feel called toward a greater purpose. They pray repeatedly for confirmation, even though confirmation has already appeared in countless forms. They ask for signs, even though the signs have been present for years. The real struggle is not the absence of guidance, but the fear of stepping into responsibility. Endless preparation offers the illusion of safety because it postpones the moment when action must reveal whether the calling is real. Yet destiny cannot unfold inside the safety of preparation alone. It requires participation. This is why the listener must learn to recognize the moment when waiting quietly transforms into avoidance. Waiting is patient when it strengthens readiness, but it becomes avoidance when it protects comfort. The difference between the two is revealed through honesty with yourself. Ask whether your preparation is still adding something truly necessary to your readiness, or whether it has become a familiar routine that delays the step you already know must be taken. The Kairos moment does not demand perfection before movement begins. It asks for trust. It asks for the willingness to carry what you have already been given and begin the journey, even if every detail of the path is not visible yet. Just as Moses had to lift his staff and step toward the sea before the waters opened, you may find that the next miracle in your life is waiting on the other side of your first step, rather than at the end of another season of preparation. The battle between spirit and brain. As the realization of a Kairos moment grows clearer and the call to action becomes impossible to ignore, many people encounter a struggle that feels deeply confusing. On one level, your spirit understands what must happen next. Something inside you knows that movement is required. The vision makes sense to your heart, the direction feels right in your soul, and the urgency continues to press gently but persistently against your awareness. Yet at the same time, another force seems to hold you in place. Your thoughts become tangled with hesitation. You wake up determined to take action, but hours pass, and somehow the step you intended to take remains undone. Instead of moving forward, your mind becomes occupied with small tasks, distractions, and endless analysis. This inner contradiction can be frustrating because it creates the feeling that two different versions of yourself are competing for control. One part of you feels inspired and ready, while another part feels heavy, uncertain, and cautious. This tension is not a sign that your calling is wrong. It is a reflection of the natural battle that exists between the spiritual awareness within you and the biological systems that govern the human mind. To understand this struggle more clearly, it helps to explore how the brain operates through different states of activity, often described through patterns known as brain waves. These patterns reflect the electrical rhythms through which the brain processes information, emotions, and decisions. Among these states, one of the most common during waking life is known as the beta state. Beta is the brain's alert mode. It is the state you enter when you are solving problems, analyzing situations, and paying attention to the details of your environment. In many ways, beta is extremely useful because it allows you to function effectively in daily life. It helps you plan, organize, calculate risks, and navigate complex tasks that require logical thinking. However, beta also carries a limitation that becomes especially noticeable when you are standing at the edge of a kairos moment. The beta state is closely connected to the brain's survival system. It evolved to protect you from danger by constantly scanning your environment for potential threats. When the brain is operating strongly in beta, it prioritizes safety above all else. It asks questions such as, what could go wrong? How might this fail? And what risks am I taking if I move forward? These questions can be valuable in certain situations, but when they dominate the mind, they create a powerful resistance to anything unfamiliar. This is why many people feel mentally stuck, even when their spirit is urging them forward. The spirit senses opportunity and purpose, while the brain, operating in beta, senses uncertainty and possible danger. From the brain's perspective, stepping into a new calling, launching a new project, changing direction, or accepting greater responsibility looks like a risk that must be carefully analyzed. The brain remembers past failures, past embarrassment, past disappointment, and it tries to protect you from experiencing those emotions again. In doing so, it slows down your movement and floods your thoughts with caution. This protective mechanism can create what feels like a fog over your mind. You know what you should do, but your thoughts keep circling around doubts and possibilities rather than translating that knowledge into action. In this sense, the struggle between spirit and brain is not a moral failure, but a biological reality. Your spirit may already be aligned with your purpose, yet your brain remains locked in survival mode because it is designed to preserve stability. When survival instincts dominate the mind, they can unintentionally block the very qualities that make spiritual movement possible. Faith becomes difficult because the brain demands proof before it feels safe. Intuition becomes quiet because logical analysis dominates every thought. Courage weakens because the brain interprets unfamiliar territory as potential danger rather than opportunity. This is why stepping into a kairos moment often requires a shift not only in belief, but also in mental state. When the brain remains trapped in constant beta activity, it becomes like a machine that only processes caution. Every new idea must pass through layers of analysis that ask whether the timing is perfect, whether every detail has been solved, whether every possible risk has been eliminated. Yet the nature of faith rarely satisfies those requirements. Faith does not ignore wisdom or responsibility, but it recognizes that some doors only open when trust moves ahead of certainty. The key insight here is that your spirit may already be ready, even if your mind feels uncertain. The heaviness you feel is not proof that you are unprepared. It may simply be the brain attempting to protect you from unfamiliar territory. Recognizing this dynamic can be liberating because it allows you to interpret the hesitation differently. Instead of believing the resistance means you should stop, you begin to see it as a natural signal that you are approaching something significant. The mind is reacting because you are stepping beyond the boundaries of what feels predictable. Yet beyond those boundaries lies the space where growth, purpose, and transformation unfold. Understanding the battle between spirit and brain allows you to approach this moment with greater compassion toward yourself and greater confidence in the direction you feel called to take. The tension you experience is not evidence that the path is wrong. It is the natural friction that occurs whenever destiny begins to move faster than comfort, renewing the mind through a higher mental state. As the struggle between the spirit's calling and the brain's protective instincts becomes clearer, the next step in understanding this journey lies in learning how the mind itself can be renewed and elevated into a state that supports rather than resists spiritual movement. Throughout spiritual teachings, there is a phrase that has echoed for centuries, a call that appears simple on the surface, yet carries profound depth when examined closely. The instruction to renew the mind is not merely about changing opinions or adopting more positive thoughts. It refers to something far more fundamental. Renewal of the mind involves a transformation in the very state through which the mind operates. It means shifting the internal environment of the brain so that it no longer functions primarily from stress and survival, but instead from clarity, openness, and alignment with deeper wisdom. When the ancient text speaks of transformation through the renewing of the mind, the original meaning of the word transformation points toward a structural shift, something similar to the metamorphosis of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. The creature does not simply learn new behaviors. Its entire structure changes, allowing it to move through the world in a completely different way. In the same manner, the renewal of the mind invites a change in the brain's operating rhythm, so that perception, intuition, and faith can function freely, rather than being restricted by constant tension and fear. One of the most fascinating discoveries about the human brain is that it does not operate in a single fixed pattern. Instead, it shifts between several different states depending on how relaxed, alert, or focused a person is at a given moment. Earlier, we explored how the beta state dominates when the mind is focused on analysis, pressure, and survival. Beta is valuable for solving problems and managing daily tasks, yet it often keeps the mind tightly bound to logic and caution. When someone lives almost entirely within this state, every decision becomes filtered through the question of safety rather than possibility. But beyond the beta rhythm, there exists another state, known as theta. And this state carries qualities that feel remarkably different. Theta emerges when the mind becomes deeply relaxed, yet highly aware at the same time. In this condition, the constant noise of anxious thinking quiets down, making space for creativity, insight, and intuition to rise naturally to the surface. Many people experience brief moments of theta during meditation, prayer, deep reflection, or the peaceful moments just before falling asleep. In this state, time seems to slow down or even disappear. Ideas appear suddenly without the strain of analysis. Solutions that once seemed complicated reveal themselves with surprising simplicity. It is as if the mind has stepped out of the crowded marketplace of constant thought and entered a quiet library where deeper understanding can finally be heard.
What makes the theta state particularly fascinating is that it is not foreign to human nature. In fact, it is one of the earliest and most natural states of consciousness we experience during childhood. Young children spend much of their early years operating in theta rhythms. This is one reason they are able to absorb language, creativity, and new experiences with such remarkable speed. Their minds are open, flexible, and curious, because they have not yet become dominated by the rigid patterns of stress and over-analysis that often shape adult thinking. Children ask questions freely, imagine possibilities without limits, and trust their perceptions without immediately filtering everything through fear. Their minds function like fertile soil, where ideas can grow quickly and naturally. As people grow older, however, the pressures of life gradually push the brain towards stronger beta patterns. Responsibilities increase, stress accumulates, and the mind becomes trained to scan constantly for problems that must be solved. While this adaptation helps adults survive in complex environments, it can also create distance from the intuitive clarity that once flowed naturally during childhood. The renewal of the mind therefore involves rediscovering a balance where the mind can still use logic when necessary, while also accessing the deeper calm and insight that the theta state provides. When the brain shifts from constant beta tension into the peaceful awareness of theta, something remarkable begins to happen. Fear loosens its grip. The endless stream of worries begins to quiet. In that calmer mental landscape, the voice of intuition becomes easier to recognize. Spiritual insight often becomes clearer because the mind is no longer drowning in noise. This is why many moments of profound guidance or creativity arrive when a person is relaxed, walking quietly in nature, sitting in reflection, or engaging in deep prayer. The mind has stepped into a rhythm that allows deeper awareness to emerge. Moving from beta into theta does not require abandoning responsibility or intelligence. Instead, it means learning to quiet the mental storm long enough to hear the wisdom that exists beyond constant analysis. When the mind enters that calmer state, faith and action begin to work together rather than competing against each other. The spirit senses direction, and the mind becomes calm enough to follow it. In this alignment, the guidance you seek does not need to shout over anxiety, because the mind has finally become still enough to listen. The modern world keeps you stuck in stress. As you begin to understand the power of renewing the mind and the possibility of shifting into a calmer and more intuitive mental state, it becomes important to recognize why so many people struggle to remain in that space for long. The challenge is not simply personal weakness or lack of discipline. The reality is that the modern world has been carefully structured in ways that continuously pull the human mind back into a state of stress and survival thinking. Everywhere you turn, there are signals demanding your attention, notifications flashing, headlines shouting urgency, deadlines approaching, and responsibilities multiplying. The pace of modern life rarely allows the mind to rest in quiet awareness for very long. Instead, it constantly stimulates the brain to remain alert, reactive, and slightly anxious. This environment naturally pushes people into the beta state again and again, because beta thrives on stimulation and pressure. In many ways, the modern world operates like a giant machine designed to keep the mind scanning for problems. The phone in your pocket, which once promised convenience and connection, now acts like a small alarm system that never truly sleeps. Every vibration, every message, every alert tells your brain that something requires immediate attention. Even when the information itself is harmless, the brain interprets the interruption as a signal that it must remain vigilant. Over time, this pattern trains the nervous system to live in a constant state of mild tension. The moment the mind begins to settle into calm reflection, another notification appears to pull it back into activity. Add to this the constant flow of news, social media updates, and digital conversations, and the mind becomes flooded with information that often carries emotional intensity. Stories of crisis, conflict, and urgency dominate the headlines because they capture attention quickly. Yet every time the brain absorbs these signals, it subtly reinforces the survival response that belongs to the beta state. Instead of experiencing long periods of peaceful focus, the mind jumps from one concern to another, from one small urgency to the next. This pattern creates a cycle where the brain rarely has the opportunity to enter deeper states of reflection and clarity. Even when you sit down to pray, meditate, or simply think quietly about your next step, the echoes of those distractions remain in the background. The mind replays unfinished tasks, unanswered messages, and the countless details of daily obligations. It is not surprising that many people feel mentally exhausted, even when they have not done physically demanding work. The brain has been running continuously, like an engine that never powers down. Within this environment, it becomes extremely difficult to hear spiritual direction clearly, because spiritual guidance often speaks in a quieter voice than the constant noise of the world. Intuition rarely arrives through shouting or dramatic announcements. Instead, it appears through subtle impressions, moments of insight, and quiet clarity that rises gently when the mind becomes still. When the mind is flooded with noise, those signals become harder to detect. It is similar to trying to hear a soft melody while standing in the middle of a crowded city intersection. The music may be playing, but the surrounding noise makes it almost impossible to recognize. Many people interpret this difficulty as a spiritual problem, believing that God has stopped speaking or that guidance has disappeared from their lives. In reality, the guidance may still be present, but the mental environment is too crowded for it to be recognized. This realization leads to an important responsibility for anyone who desires clarity in their calling. The mind must be intentionally guided into a different rhythm, rather than passively accepting the pace of the modern world. Clarity does not usually appear by accident within an environment that constantly feeds stress and distraction. It emerges when you deliberately create space where the mind can breathe again. This does not require abandoning modern life or escaping from all responsibilities. Instead, it involves simple but powerful shifts in how you engage with your environment. Moments of quiet reflection become essential rather than optional. Time spent away from constant notifications allows the brain to slow its racing patterns. Walks in nature, prayer, deep breathing, and intentional silence give the mind permission to release the tension it has been carrying throughout the day. When these moments are practiced consistently, the brain gradually relearns how to move out of survival thinking and into a calmer, more receptive state. In that calmer state, the difference is remarkable. Thoughts become clearer. Decisions that once felt overwhelming begin to organize themselves naturally. Ideas appear that were hidden beneath the noise of distraction. Most importantly, the quiet voice of spiritual guidance becomes easier to recognize again. The direction that once seemed distant begins to feel present and accessible. The listener is therefore encouraged not to wait passively for clarity to appear, but to actively cultivate the mental environment where clarity can grow. By intentionally stepping away from the patterns that keep the brain trapped in constant beta stress, you create space for the deeper rhythm of wisdom and faith to return. In doing so, you reclaim the ability to hear the guidance that has been waiting patiently beneath the noise all along. The Jonah complex. Fear of success. As the layers of this journey continue to unfold, and the listener begins to recognize the signs of divine timing, another hidden barrier often emerges that few people initially expect. Most individuals assume that the greatest obstacle standing between them and their purpose is fear of failure. They believe the reason people hesitate to move forward is because they doubt their ability to succeed, or worry that they might embarrass themselves if things go wrong. While that fear certainly exists, there is another, deeper resistance that often hides beneath the surface. In many cases, the greatest obstacle is not the fear that you will fail, but the quiet, unsettling realization that you might actually succeed. This deeper resistance is what can be described as the Jonah complex, a pattern that has echoed through spiritual history for centuries. The story of Jonah is often remembered as a simple tale about disobedience. Yet when examined closely, it reveals something far more profound about the human heart. Jonah received a clear assignment that carried enormous influence. He was instructed to go to the city of Nineveh and deliver a message that could change the direction of an entire nation. What makes this story remarkable is not that Jonah hesitated for a moment or asked for clarification. Instead, he immediately ran in the opposite direction. He boarded a ship heading away from the very place he had been called to go. At first glance, this reaction seems confusing because the narrative does not suggest that Jonah doubted the message itself. In fact, later in the story, Jonah reveals the truth about his fear. He admits that he knew the message would work. He understood that the people might actually listen, that change might truly happen, and that his words might carry real power. The weight of that possibility frightened him more than failure ever could. When you consider this perspective, the story begins to mirror a pattern that many chosen individuals experience in their own lives. The hesitation they feel is not always rooted in insecurity. Deep inside, they may sense that the calling placed upon their life carries genuine influence. They know that if they step forward, their voice will be heard. Their actions may inspire others. Their work may create change that reaches beyond their personal comfort zone. And with that influence comes visibility, responsibility, and expectations that cannot easily be ignored. Remaining hidden feels safer because anonymity carries no pressure. When no one expects anything from you, you are free from the weight of responsibility. But stepping into purpose removes that shield of invisibility. Suddenly, your actions matter. Your decisions affect other people. Your words carry meaning that can shape lives and open doors for others who are watching your example. For some individuals, this realization creates an internal tension that they struggle to explain. On one hand, their spirit longs to fulfill the calling placed within them. They feel the pull of purpose, like a current moving beneath the surface of their life. Yet another part of them quietly retreats from the spotlight that purpose brings. This inner conflict can cause people to delay opportunities, underestimate their potential, or remain in environments that keep them comfortably unnoticed. It is not always a conscious decision. In many cases, it happens subconsciously, appearing through small choices that slowly postpone the moment when influence must be embraced. They may tell themselves that they need more preparation, or that the timing is not quite right. Yet beneath those explanations lies a deeper hesitation. Accepting the assignment means accepting that their life carries significance, and significance requires courage. The Jonah complex reveals that running from purpose is not always an act of rebellion. Sometimes it is the reaction of a heart that feels overwhelmed by the magnitude of what it carries. Being chosen for a meaningful assignment means that the quiet life of anonymity may no longer be an option. It means stepping into spaces where your voice will matter, and where your presence will create movement around you. Yet the very weight that feels intimidating is also evidence of the potential placed within you. The fact that you sense the responsibility is a sign that your spirit recognizes the importance of the role you are meant to play. When Jonah eventually fulfilled his assignment, the result was transformation that reached far beyond what he imagined. The city changed direction because one person delivered the message they were called to bring. The same principle continues to unfold in the lives of those who feel the call of purpose today. Many chosen individuals hesitate not because they are incapable, but because they understand that their influence will create real change once it is released. Recognizing this pattern allows you to confront the fear honestly, rather than disguising it as uncertainty or delay. The question is not whether you are capable of fulfilling the assignment, but whether you are willing to accept the visibility that comes with it. The moment you acknowledge that your fear may be rooted in the power of success rather than the threat of failure, the path forward becomes clearer. Purpose is rarely comfortable at first, because it stretches you beyond the identity you once held. But the influence waiting on the other side of that stretch is exactly the reason the calling was placed within you in the first place. 3 tactics that will try to delay you. As the moment of movement draws closer and the call to step forward becomes unmistakable, another important truth must be understood with clarity. Whenever a Kairos moment begins to unfold, resistance also begins to rise. This resistance does not always appear in dramatic or obvious forms. Rarely does it announce itself as direct opposition to your purpose. Instead, it often arrives disguised as ordinary circumstances, reasonable thoughts, or subtle emotional pressures that seem harmless at first glance. The speaker warns that in the coming period, the listener may encounter 3 specific tactics that have delayed countless people before them. These tactics are not random obstacles, but predictable patterns that appear whenever someone approaches a breakthrough. Recognizing them ahead of time is essential, because awareness transforms confusion into strategy. When you know what to expect, you are far less likely to be pulled off course by forces that are designed to slow your progress. The first tactic appears through what can be called the logic trap, a pattern where the mind becomes so focused on analyzing every detail that movement gradually comes to a halt. At first, this tactic seems harmless, because logic itself is not the enemy. Reason, planning, and careful thinking are valuable tools that help people avoid unnecessary mistakes. But the logic trap works by exaggerating these tools until they become obstacles instead of supports. The mind begins asking endless questions that appear wise, but secretly create delay. Is the timing perfect? Have you prepared every possible contingency? What if the market changes? What if the response is negative? What if there is a better moment later? These questions may sound responsible, yet when they multiply without limit, they form a maze where every path leads back to hesitation. The person caught inside the logic trap begins to believe that one more piece of information is required before action can begin. Yet every new piece of information produces another set of questions, and the cycle continues indefinitely. In this way, the logic trap slowly drains momentum until the Kairos window passes unnoticed. Faith operates differently from this pattern because faith understands that some decisions must be made with incomplete information. When a calling emerges, it rarely arrives with every detail perfectly explained. The next step often becomes visible only after the first step has already been taken. The logic trap attempts to reverse this order by demanding certainty before obedience. Recognizing this tactic allows you to interrupt the pattern by remembering that divine assignments are rarely solved like mathematical equations. They are lived out through courageous participation. The second tactic that often appears during these moments can be described as false emergencies. This tactic is especially effective because it disguises itself as legitimate responsibility. Suddenly, a series of urgent situations begins to demand your immediate attention. Messages arrive that require quick responses. Unexpected problems appear that feel impossible to ignore. Family tensions, work pressures, technical difficulties, or sudden obligations begin to multiply in ways that seem strangely timed. Each issue individually may appear reasonable, yet together, they create a storm of activity that pulls your focus away from the one assignment that truly matters. False emergencies work by convincing you that everything else must be solved first before you can return to your calling. Hours turn into days, and days into weeks, while the original purpose slowly fades into the background. What makes this tactic so powerful is that it rarely looks like opposition. It simply looks like life becoming busy. Yet those who learn to recognize this pattern understand that not every urgent situation deserves equal priority. Some tasks must be addressed quickly, while others can wait without consequence. Wisdom lies in protecting the time and focus required for the work that truly matters. This leads to the third tactic, which is often the most emotionally challenging of all. It is known as phantom guilt. Unlike the first two tactics, which operate primarily through thoughts and circumstances, phantom guilt works through relationships and emotions. As you begin to focus more intensely on your calling, some people around you may react in ways that create pressure to return to familiar patterns. They may say that you have changed or that you are becoming distant. They may question why you were spending so much time on your vision rather than maintaining the routines that once kept everyone comfortable. Sometimes the pressure comes through subtle comments rather than direct criticism. Other times, it appears through emotional disappointment that makes you feel responsible for their discomfort. The purpose of phantom guilt is not always malicious. In many cases, the people creating the pressure simply fear losing the version of you they once knew. Yet the effect can still be powerful. The emotional weight of disappointing others may tempt you to step back from the path you are beginning to walk. This is why the story of Nehemiah offers such a powerful example of how to respond when these tactics appear. Nehemiah had been given a clear assignment to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, a task that required focus, courage, and persistence. As the work progressed, his opponents repeatedly tried to interrupt the mission by inviting him to meetings that seemed harmless on the surface. They suggested that he come down from the wall and discuss matters with them in nearby villages. The invitation sounded polite and reasonable. Yet Nehemiah understood that leaving the work even briefly could derail the entire project. Instead of allowing himself to be drawn into endless discussions or emotional distractions, he sent a simple message in response. "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down." Those words carry profound wisdom for anyone walking through a Kairos moment. They reveal that protecting your calling sometimes requires the courage to decline invitations, ignore distractions, and resist the pull of unnecessary obligations. The work you have been assigned carries significance that cannot be sacrificed for the sake of temporary comfort or approval. When the logic trap begins whispering doubts, when false emergencies try to steal your focus, and when phantom guilt attempts to pull you back into familiar patterns, the response remains the same. You are doing a great work, and you cannot come down. Holding that posture allows momentum to continue building until the vision that once felt distant begins to take visible form in the world around you. The commissioning of the chosen one. As this message reaches its final moment, everything that has been revealed begins to converge into a single turning point, a symbolic activation that represents far more than the end of a speech. It becomes the moment where understanding transforms into commitment, and awareness transforms into movement. Throughout this journey, you have been guided through the signs of divine timing, the difference between preparation and hesitation, the battle between spirit and mind, and the subtle tactics that attempt to delay purpose. Each piece of insight has been building toward this exact moment. The purpose was never simply to inform you, but to position you. Information without activation changes very little. But when awareness meets decision, something powerful begins to shift within a person's life. This is why the conclusion of this message does not arrive quietly. Instead, it becomes a commissioning, a symbolic invitation for you to rise mentally and spiritually from the long season of waiting that has defined so much of your journey until now. Imagine yourself standing up within your spirit, as if you have been sitting in a waiting room for years, watching the clock while wondering when your name would finally be called. During that waiting season, you learned patience. You endured uncertainty. You carried questions that seemed to have no immediate answers. Yet all along the waiting room was not the final destination. It was simply the place where strength was built and clarity slowly formed beneath the surface of your life. Now the moment has arrived when remaining seated is no longer the right posture. The invitation before you is to rise, not necessarily with dramatic external gestures, but with an internal shift of identity. Rising means acknowledging that the preparation season has served its purpose, and that the next step now belongs to you. In this commissioning moment, a declaration is spoken, not as empty words, but as a reminder of the authority that already exists within your spirit. Fear that once whispered hesitation no longer holds the final voice. Distractions that once scattered your attention no longer define your direction. The paralysis that came from endless analysis begins to loosen its grip as clarity takes its place. This declaration does not magically remove every challenge that may appear ahead, but it does something far more important. It realigns your posture with the truth of who you are becoming. When your posture changes internally, the way you respond to circumstances changes as well. Obstacles that once seemed overwhelming begin to look like temporary steps rather than permanent walls. Uncertainty that once produced anxiety begins to feel like the natural space where faith grows stronger. In this moment, the message places one final question before you. A question that echoes beyond the boundaries of this conversation and into the quiet center of your own heart. Are you ready to carry the assignment that has been forming within your life? This question is not meant to intimidate you, but to awaken your choice. Destiny is never forced upon a person without their consent. Even when purpose has been carefully prepared through years of experience, the final step always requires a response. Heaven may open the door, but you must choose to walk through it. The beauty of this moment lies in its simplicity. The response does not require elaborate speeches or perfect confidence. It begins with a single decision, a quiet but determined yes, spoken within your spirit. That yes represents more than agreement. It becomes the bridge between preparation and participation. It signals that you are willing to move forward even without seeing every detail of the path ahead. The moment that yes is spoken, something subtle yet powerful takes place. The waiting room that once defined your season begins to fade into the past. You are no longer standing on the outside of your purpose, wondering when the opportunity will appear. You are stepping directly into the Kairos moment that has been unfolding around you all along. Destiny rarely announces itself with fireworks or dramatic applause. Often, it begins quietly, through the courage of one person choosing to move when the moment arrives. By answering yes, you align yourself with that movement. You leave the waiting room behind and begin walking into the unfolding landscape of the life you were always meant to live.